I often find that I need an ink block test that is tailored to... Well, I can't say it.
Hello and welcome to Beer Christianity. I'm Jonty.
I'm Laura.
I'm Malky.
And we are currently, I don't know if you can hear, but there are people talking in the background, and it's not because we're suffering a home invasion, but because we are in a fine, I'm so sorry to admit this, Wetherspoons pub. Boo Wetherspoons, yeah, boo Brexit, boo whatever the fuck else he is. In Milton Keynes, land of dreams. We're really hoping that one of the robot delivery vehicles will show up at the door and say hello to us, and we can throw it some microchips. I don't know, what do they eat? I'm a scientist. Okay, I think the important thing here is to ask Malky about the drone-ridden society that he lives in. What the hell? You guys have robots in your town?
Yeah, it's pretty much like Back to the Future. And if you try and steal those little robot guys, they'll call the police.
They'll call the police?
Yeah.
Fucking, you can't even give them stitches.
Yeah. They've got onboard cameras and that, and they'll, I don't know.
We have to find one.
Yeah, we
have to go and find one.
So for listeners who think we are making this up, Milton Keynes is a town in England that all British people hate because it has a decent road system that is in a grid. Because, if you're in America, there are towns in this country that don't align their roads on a grid because grids are for the weak, or, I don't know, being able to find...
Olden days.
Because of olden days.
Yeah, because it's all old and that.
Yeah, but they weren't intentionally going, we hate grids. Like, that wasn't a thing.
No, like your Oxfords and your Edinburghs and that.
That they have these days.
Had like buildings that weren't built for modern transport.
That's true. But then why do British people have such disdain for a town that has been planned to have decent, ways to...
fucking roundabouts.
They hate the roundabouts.
They hate the roundabouts.
Yeah, I mean, they're really efficient and you can understand where you're going.
That's right.
I don't drive, I just know they don't like the roundabouts.
Another thing Laura doesn't... We're introducing a new segment called A Few Things Laura Doesn't Like. And this week, we're going to open up with e-scooters, also in Milton Keynes. How do you feel about those?
I think that people look stupid on them. And I think if you're gonna pay to rent an e-scooter or like spend hundreds of pounds on a flipping electric scooter where you're not gonna move, buy a bike. Just buy a bike. Buy a bike. Like, what you're looking for in this mode of transport is a bike. So just get a bike. Like, you want to do cycle lanes, go on a bike.
Good. So look forward to more of that segment.
In a segment that could go on for so many episodes.
I mean, I think it could be the entire episode if we're not careful. So welcome to Beer Christianity. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can find us at Beer Exianity. You can also find us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on all of your favorite podcast platforms. This episode has literally and for real Justin Welby.
Was that added in post?
It's so
amazing sound effects.
It's incredible what they can do with these things today. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, in an interview that was recorded about a year ago now, maybe a little bit over a year ago, at Greenbelt 2019.
I think we need to talk about what a momentous moment this is for Beer Christianity, the podcast. Like, the amount of jokes we made in the first 3 to 4 episodes of like, oh yeah, we'll get Justin Welby on this podcast. Like, holy shit, we did it, guys. Like,
I can't believe it. Thank you so much to the people at Lambeth Palace for letting us do
this. Thank you to everyone who signed the petition to get Justin Welby on the Beer Christianity podcast.
Free Welby.
You did it, Reddit.
So we've got an interview coming up with Justin Welby, who's going to be talking a little bit about, I think we talk power, we talk the global church, and I think my favorite part of the interview is the beginning, where we talk about me. I just think that's unsurprisingly exactly what I love. So, without further ado, Archbishop of Canterbury, head of the Anglican Communion worldwide, as well as the Church of England, and according to him, not a person.
Is that cool? Yeah, of course, yeah. You're running, excellent. I have 2 recorders because I have no shorthand and have enough.
That's all right, Jonty.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. Where are you from?
South Africa originally. I came here for a year 15 years ago.
And you stayed.
You know, it happens. The BBC and the NHS are beautiful things.
What do you do with the NHS?
No, I just, it cures me of cancer.
Oh.
I wasn't a tourist for, you know, the health tourism or anything like that.
No.
It's a nice
So
thing.
what were you, what was the cancer?
Testicular, and then it spread to the lymph nodes, and I was declared cancer-free on Thursday.
Oh, congratulations.
I thought I'd meet you and make
Praise
it about
God.
me.
No, that is just...
It is cool. It's really cool.
That is fabulous.
Yeah, I'm very pleased. So, yeah. Does institutional power, I'm thinking particularly in terms of government and Christians getting into it and that sort of stuff, does it always necessarily corrupt? Or can it be useful for making change?
Oh, it can certainly be useful for making change. Corrupt. I think I would go for the word corrode. I think it's corrosive. I'm just thinking aloud there, but I think what it can do is like rust. It weakens the structure, and in the end the structure fractures. But it takes a while. It's not corruption so obviously. It can do, and you have to be very aware of that. It's very interesting, it's very stimulating. That's very corrosive. And you just have to come back to spending time in the diocese, in churches that are just working away in the community, to go in places where nobody thinks you matter tuppence, to just being with people who take you down a peg or two.
Does Western liberal, for want of a better word, Christianity have something to offer the rest of the world? And what is it?
Oh, huge things. I think one of the key things at its best is a humble and confident engagement with the world as it is, not hiding in a bubble and seeking to make the world as we'd like it to be. In other words, it says, well, this is reality. How are we going to deal with it? You know, you mentioned the issue of people's sexuality. Some people are gay. Let's not say there are no gay people. Let's say some people are gay. They are people. They are human beings for whom Christ died. They have the same human dignity as every other human being on the face of the planet. So, what are the consequences for that? How do we think this through with our sisters and brothers whose cultural instincts put there by us very often, and the laws put there by us, just let's be clear, our history, are very different. So I think at its best, liberalism says this is the structure, this is the reality. This sense of engaging with reality is the gift of liberalism at its best. This sense of saying, my conclusion is right, and you ignorant people have to learn how to be less ignorant, which isn't said explicitly but is said implicitly, is liberalism at its worst. You find it in every part of the church and every theological approach.
Can evangelicalism survive this new world, or will it naturally tend to become post-evangelical or fundamentalist or something different?
Well, fundamentalism is a socio-anthropological approach. I think fundamentalism in its worst sense, which we see growing over the last 30, 40 years in all the world faiths. So, you know, let's fundamentalism in the sense of shutting ourselves off and of violence and of hatred of people and that kind of thing, which is not the original meaning of fundamentalism, of course. Can evangelicalism survive? Christianity will survive. I'm not a party person. I don't carry a party card. to describe yourself nowadays as an evangelical means you have to say, yes, but I'm not one of that sort or this sort, and I am one, a bit like that sort, I'm a bit like this sort.
Yeah.
I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I'm an Orthodox Christian for whom the Bible is my final authority, properly interpreted, it's my final authority in matters of faith and practice. That's what I am. Will that survive? Yes, absolutely. And there'll be a load of arguments about what properly interpreted means.
Yeah, yeah.
But would you call it evangelicalism? Some evangelicals say, yes, of course it is. Others will say, oh no, that's not real evangelicalism. Because it doesn't tick this box or that box. And liberalism will be the same, and Anglican Catholicism will be the same, and traditionalists will be the same. And it's the labels are less important than, do we love and serve Jesus Christ? Do we come back to Jesus Christ? Are we humbled by the beauty and glory and grace and love that reaches out to us every morning as sinners and lifts us up?
In the Baptist world, we're having a lot of discussions about listening to the world church and the majority world church, and the tension that can come from what do you listen to and what don't. I mean, obviously, the Anglicans don't have any of those tensions.
we're uniquely united.
Yeah, there's just no difference. It's just very great.
We're all of one line.
So I guess, as an opener, do you recognise the contention that it's time that the church in the West and the North listens better to the majority world church, or do you think that's a red herring?
It's certainly not a red herring. No, it's certainly not. Sorry, I put the emphasis in the wrong place. It's certainly not a red herring. Yeah, whatever. But listening isn't enough.
Yeah,
we have to change. This has been a real thing of mine for a very long time, most of my life, since being greatly influenced by Kenyan Christians in the 1970s. But I've been, just the last few months, enormously struck by Robert Heaney's book that was published this year, or end of last year, called Post-Colonial Theology. And anyone who's concerned about differentials of power should read that book. It is uncomfortable reading. He looks at a number of case studies, as well as he writes very well. It's a very powerful book. So my thinking's adapting. The point is that we've moved, and this isn't just him. I mean, this is as you know, history. We've moved from a point of straightforward colonialism through to saying that it's a very good thing that local people are made bishops, through to where we are now, which is to say, well, we must listen to the global south. And we love our sisters and brothers in the global south, provided they agree with us.
Mm.
If they don't agree with us, well, then to quote Bishop Jack Spong in the 90s, well, then they're just one generation away from barbarism.
Wow.
It's the other side of horrendous. I mean, nowadays I think it would genuinely be called racist.
Yeah,
quite rightly.
Absolutely.
I've had a theologian in this country say to me, why are you and Isabel Hamley, my chaplain, why are you so concerned about global south theology? There aren't any serious theologians in the global south, except the ones that have moved to the global north and have effectively agree with us. So, sorry, it's a long answer to but it's a very profound question. Of course, we've got to listen, but we've got to go a long way before we listen, beyond listening. We've got to allow ourselves to be changed.
There's a listening that involves, we want to hear about the stuff that doesn't really hit us where it hurts. It doesn't hit the hot buttons, because do you want to listen to my Ugandan brothers and sisters when they're very pro death penalty for homosexuality?
Exactly.
Or some of my brothers and sisters in India who don't believe women should speak in church, or any of that kind of stuff. How do we negotiate that without enforcing a new liberal imperialism?
Well, we do enforce a new liberal imperialism. We're there already, and not just within the church. It's part of the overall way in which the global system runs. Now, many of those things are really good things. Let's be clear. I'm not saying it's wrong to oppose the death penalty for homosexuality. I'm not saying it's wrong to oppose all kinds of, female genital mutilation, etc., etc. But first of all, we have to know our own history. I'm going to India this end of this week for a big official visit. Ends in Amritsar. It's a century since General Dyer's troops opened fire on an unarmed crowd and killed, in the 11 days, somewhere between a minimum of 800, maximum of, I don't know, but probably over 1,000. That they are remembering that anniversary in the way we did the Great War. We need to know our history. We left our colonies by giving them democracy. We always say, yeah, but we never gave them democracy while they were our colonies. We gave it to them when we left. And we gave it to them on our model. The world trade system, the world finance system, the world commercial system, the world economic system are global north controlled, the levers of power. And the theology is simply part of that system. And I think one of the books of the Ramsay Prize, called The Theology of Everything by Peter Nolan, very, very good book, is, and I'm not telling you who's won it, but it is they were all very good books on the short list, and it's a very good book. And that touches on this area, that theology is part of our overall thinking. So how do we listen? We recognise the situation we're in. We know our history. And we don't say, oh, well, the global south is right because they're the global south. We say we must find ways of not arguing from a position of power and leverage, with the implicit threat, if you don't agree with us, you can't participate.
When we're trying to come to understandings or agree to disagree, or hopefully agree to agree, should the aim be to try and strip cultural context from our theology, or to try and make it ever more contextual but in different nodes?
Well, to strip cultural context from our theology is like saying, should the aim be to levitate? I mean, it isn't a physical possibility.
Okay.
It's not a psychological possibility. The longer this goes on, the more I think about it, the more I am deeply, deeply aware of my own insect prejudices, deeply felt right down in the depths of my being. And we can't strip our theology. I think like a middle-class 63-year-old English man.
Yeah.
That's how I think, from my particular background in history. I can't help thinking like that. There's no switch you can turn. But I can be aware that I think like that. 1 Peter 5 says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that in due time he may exalt you. Humble yourself so that he may exalt you. Mm. Secondly, and then it goes on to say, and it's all part of the same sentence, cast all your cares on him, for he cares about you. Now, the second part's as important as the first part. We only ever quote the first part, or the second part separately, but they go together. What does humbling ourselves mean? It means giving the problems to God. As Christians, we say, I can't cope with these folk, because everything in me says they're wrong. So God, how am I going to deal with this? We've got to take it to God. And these conversations, it's not just about being able to pray together and say amen together and sing happy songs together. We don't come by our Christianity. We want Christianity that opens up our gut, and changes our insides.
You're talking about earlier about arguing from a position that doesn't leverage power. How hard is that when you're the head of the Anglican Communion?
First of all, it's it's complicated. Hard, probably the wrong word. It is very complicated, head of the Anglican, technically, I am not in fact a human being. I am a focus of unity and an instrument of communion.
Fantastic.
Nowhere am I described either as a human being or as head of the Anglican Communion. So, what did you meet today? Did you meet the Archbishop of Canterbury? Well, I met the focus of unity and instrument of communion.
Is that on your business cards?
No, sadly not. It would take up too much space. But there is power, and you can misuse it. You learn to be extremely careful about what you say, or to regret when you're, in my case, usually to regret when I'm not very careful about what I say. It has a number of things. First of all, like many people, I'm the person at the centre of the organisation is very often the most clueless person. And that applies to most of us. Everyone thinks you know everything. In fact, you probably know less than most people because people don't tell you what you need to know if they don't think you'll like it. Secondly, you've got to work collegially. You've got to constantly hold yourself back. And rather than saying, well, that sounds like a good idea, we'll do that, you say, that sounds like a good idea, I'm going to ask a dozen people what they think. And every now and then, just very occasionally, the whole dozen say, I think that's a really bad idea, and I say, I'm going to do it. And then I'm usually proved wrong. But it's working to be collegiate, not to get off every pedestal that people try and put you up. Jesus washed feet. If we're not washing feet, we're not doing the job.
Thank you for the time, I really
Thank you,
appreciate
Jonty. It's really kind of you. Thank you. I'm really glad about the news as well.
Yeah,
that's
really
cool.
The absolute G official Debrett's title for the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, recorded in 2019 at Greenbelt Festival. Thank you, Greenbelt Festival, for making that possible. Thank you, Andy Walton and Ruth Mooney as well for helping us out with that. Guys, what did you think of Uncle Justin?
I mean, the first point we have to make is that please don't send us so many hate tweets about the fact that Justin Welby does not mention the coronavirus. Guys, he wasn't a no. He was 2019. Absolutely.
And ultimately, he, while he is the head of the Anglican, he's a focus for unity and what does he call it? I think that's what it is.
No.
Yeah, I think he's a focus for unity and not an actual person. But that doesn't mean that he can predict the future. So that's why he hasn't been mentioning the coronavirus in that. What else did you think of the interview and of Justin Welby?
Well, he's, I was going to say the man's a saint, but that feels like a loaded term to talk about the Archbishop.
High expectations.
But, he's just dead nice, isn't he?
He's so nice.
Just talking about you, mainly. Yeah. At the start, that you really had to turn things around. But no,
we have 15 minutes, and I really need to get this material, so if you could.
And I was impressed with the fact that you ploughed through the slight awkwardness of him briefly thinking that you worked for the NHS. I think I would have just gone with that and be like, yes, I am a doctor of brains, and it's, it's a tough job.
There's no rocket science, which is, no, he was very sweet, and I thought that was really nice, because that's a I would say by anyone's standards, a relatively important man in this country, something of a big deal, and he was genuinely interested and concerned, and after the interview was just really sweet about the whole cancer thing as well. So, pretty nice. Nice.
And as a Scottish person,
Malky's just broken a bottle and threatened me with it.
It's interesting being down here because we don't do Anglicanism. It's difficult for some of us to even say. But this is a church guy.
On the ground.
But this is a church guy, and like the stuff he says makes the actual news.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal. And I thought very smart and very kind of deep in a lot of the things he was thinking. Like, what are your favorite stuff from that interview? What were your favorite stuff from that interview? This is why we get the big names, is because of our grasp of language. Laura, what are you drinking? Or what were you drinking before you necked it?
Okay, also, sorry, who's had a beer and a half already?
Sure.
Right, don't get on me. Guys, you'll be pleased to know, back on the old faithful, the old Jack Daniels and Coke, fresh from the Wetherspoons. The only word that I can think of is teat, and I'm not enjoying it.
Squeezed fresh from the Wetherspoon's teat directly into Laura's mouth. Glass.
It is a glass at least.
Malky, you're right there.
Yeah, I'm fine.
I didn't make the switch. You made the
I
switch.
didn't mean to make this so weird.
I, on the other hand, am just drinking a normally dispensed liquid from a bottle. Adnams, Ghost Ship, and steady on, folks. It's not 0 alcohol. It's 0.5 alcohol. So,
This is mental.
I'll tell you something about the taste. It does have bold citrus flavours that I have just identified on my own from drinking it.
Does it remind you of a ship with tattered sails, with a sort of spectral hue? Spectral hue is our waiter, by the way. Kind of floats over every now and then and goes.
I'd like to deeply apologise for all the people who joined this podcast to hear our thoughts about Justin Welby.
Psych!
And that's us out of time, folks.
We should do that. We made people wait so long. No. We won't do that to you. Justin Welby will definitely be coming up in this podcast, almost certainly. So that's an Adnams Ghost Ship. And I am drinking a Stella Shandy, not a really great shandy that reminds me of the stars, but a Stella Artois Shandy. So, welcome to Beer Christianity. I mean, Laura, do you think we need to...
Hey, let's take a moment.
Let's take a moment.
Hey, guess what? You guys. Hey, do you ever find that you get tired of the same old psychological ink blot tests? I don't know about you guys, but I often find I need an ink blot test that's tailored to my specific theological and spiritual needs. Well, now there's a brand new psychological ink blot test that embraces non-dual thinking and will take you on a contemplative journey right into the second half of life. Why don't you fall upwards today by visiting beerchristianity.com/sponsored content or whatever, and be the first to try our innovative new Richard Rorschach test.
There it is. Boo! Thank you for that sponsor announcement, Malky. Okay, back to Beer Mess. Back to Justin Welby. What was your favourite thing that he was talking about?
I think the way he talked about stuff was very inspiring and made me feel like I don't have a lot to add to the podcast. I'm just so diplomatic, thought out, liberal in the best ways in terms of learning from and also teaching the global south, just acknowledging history and all that, especially how we've been having lots of conversations around privilege and white privilege in the light of Black Lives Matter. It felt like that chimed with me in terms of our approach. How can we I don't know who we are in this context, speak to, learn from the global south, we acknowledge our privilege and acknowledge our history and acknowledge all the bullshit that we've exported along with the gospel in many cases.
That's actually kind of cool because, I mean, you would expect heads of churches to, have taken on board some of that stuff post George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter kind of thing really kind of blowing up in white public consciousness. But, this was way before any of that, and the man was pretty sound. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I think that was also one of my favourite things about what he said. I think the idea of even if we don't agree with it, kind of making sure that we're listening and actively listening to the thoughts and views of the Global South and stuff like that, and not just listening to it because, well, there's a Global South and we must, like, you know, paying attention to what we maybe don't agree with, but still continuing to listen and open up those spaces. Because I think, like what he says about kind of homosexuality and the voice of women, it's very easy for us to say, like, well, you know, that can't be, like, we can't have that, that's not right, and stuff like that, when, like, you know, it's very rich, I think, especially we Christians in the UK, we can't agree on literally anything. Like, you know, we're literally like not designed to agree. Any time that we have a disagreement, we just split off and refuse to deal with the people.
I mean, Protestants, obviously.
I mean, the Catholic, yeah, they've got their own shit.
Yeah.
But like, for that environment to then go and be like, you can't, like, you know, disagree with us. It's like, I feel like it's a bit rich from us to go to them with that. So I like that. Yeah.
I do have concerns. Coming from the Global South Church and a very kind of fundamentalist part of it, I have concerns about this in the same way that I have concerns about a lot of identity politics, which suggests that you should listen to people based on their identity rather than the quality of their ideas. I think that there's stuff where it's lived experience and you need to have it, and I also think that if your theology exclusively has Northern Hemisphere middle-class white men writing it, there's a very good chance, just statistically, that you're going to miss some stuff. But I don't believe that means that is irrelevant for people around the world any more than the fact that I am not a Hellenic Jew, therefore I can't listen to Paul. I do have concerns about whether we actually mean it when we say we want to listen to the World Church, because, you know, there's a lot that the World Church, and I know it's not a monolithic kind of institution, but there's a lot that the World Church believes that is bullshit, in the same way that what we believe it can be bullshit in our churches, like the attitude to homosexuality, the attitude to women, the conversation that I had with a senior Christian cleric in Egypt who was saying how he found it horrific that we had to listen to the Muslim call to prayer in our country and we should really put a stop to that. Like, there's a lot of that sort of stuff where I'm like, you sound like my church back home in South Africa, you sound like a lot of the Christians that I know. I don't think that just because you're from the World Church, that makes those opinions ones that I should agree with or in any way wise, any more than when a Trump supporting Christian says that kind of stuff. I agree with it, and I think we have to beware of the progressive liberal church's tendency to eat itself and to self-flagellate and to self-loathe because of a really good, you know, desire to want to not be all forcing our agenda on the rest of the world. I don't know. I mean, do you guys recognize that, or do you think that is just some right-wing bullshit?
I think it's about providing an opportunity, or like opening up an opportunity, rather than saying we must automatically listen. It's like, I think,
or agree.
Yeah. We must automatically agree, because like it's giving us an opportunity to learn from them and giving them an opportunity to learn from us. Because like what Justin Welby said, it's like a lot of the views that some people are espousing are views that we have passed on to them in the past. Like that's where that comes from. So it's being open to that, like understanding of that background there, but also kind of opening up this opportunity so that, like, yes, we don't automatically have to agree, but I think it is unfair so we can't exclude just because of certain opinions, and we have to be open for them hearing us and us hearing them. And I think it is different from, like, you kind of, interesting that you kind of compared it to Trump supporting Christians and stuff like that. I think it's different because that is one specific opinion, and like I think that's one view on one certain thing, whereas you can't just blanketly say like, oh, we can't let somebody from this background come here because they might say this. Like, I think that's the difference it might make. So.
Although I could easily exclude Trump supporting Christians.
I mean, that's different.
Is there a danger with our liberalism that we are too uncritical, or that we pretend to want to listen but only to the bits we've already decided we agree with?
Yeah. Wait a minute. Did you ask two? Was that
You okay, man?
He's overstimulated from being in the
I'm out in a physical place. It's past my bedtime. I'm confused.
Been hunting for Milton Keynes robots all day.
I felt like there was two parts to that question, and that I just can't do
I
that.
cannot remember anything I say 30 seconds after I say it. I think you know that.
I guess without getting specific, the sort of the kind of more progressive notion would be, yes, we need to learn from people that are different. We need to listen and take on board. Maybe we've got it all wrong and they've got it right. But then, like, yeah, that sounds like, let's drill into specifics of what we mean. And then I think you can critically take and leave stuff. But like, yeah, the tendency is always to assume, I think, is to always assume we have it right and we want to protect and preserve what we hold sacred, and be slow to go, what I hold dear, that's just cultural baggage. It's interesting because we use specific examples about what not to take on or what to challenge about certain parts of the global south. But I'd be interested to know what's maybe informed your understanding that's countercultural to us. I'm gonna guess liberation theology, where that's more of a given in some parts of the world. But I don't know. You tell me.
I was not big in my very upper middle class white church in the suburbs. Liberation theology was openly spoken against, which is my problem. Is that I think when you start treating the global south as a monolith, you end up pretending that it doesn't have the level of diversity like we do. Like Laura, I think you were saying with the, we can't agree on shit, why would they? And I think that's the thing. It's not just that they wouldn't agree with us, it's that there is no they in any kind of singular sense. So there's just as much diversity in the African church as there is in the continent of Europe's church. Like the idea that there would be no difference between German and ones in Devon or Cornwall in a tiny little kind of village.
Or like, yeah, this might be really ham-fisted, but how I've heard certain Islamic or so-called Islamic extremists.
I don't think you can use the term ham-fisted and then say that. That's an actual hate crime.
Okay. Anywho. So I mean, could you get more ham-fisted? Could you get more ham-fisted? Yeah. Anyway, point is, I don't know what the point was. Yes. So like your ISIS members would see any Westerner as a Christian and would see, the kind of crass pop music, liberal, like drunken
porn
agenda.
Is Christian.
So and that's as like, that's mad to us, to evangelical Christians going, of course there's tons of nuance, and that's like, just flattening everything into a one-dimensional shape, and we do that with continents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with what I find the most kind of paternalistic stuff that really bothers me is when you hear the people say, I'm sure I've mentioned this in the podcast before, we're now going to pray in an African style, and that means we're all going to pray together. And I'm like, what you're praying like is a Pentecostal. It's not like an African. There's, again, what is an African? When I hear people talking about, I want to learn from the African church, the same people will often say, the church in Africa is, a mile wide and an inch deep, are also saying, but you know what we can learn from them is just how fervently they pray and their faith, or some variation on the they're so poor but they're so happy kind of thing. Now, maybe there are things that we can learn in terms of that, but what I would like the Western liberal Enlightenment influenced church, which I love and which I think has so much to offer the world in terms of a kind of Christianity that is counter the culture of wealth worship or power worship, and has been able to at least intellectually distance itself from those things, if not actually from the power of the state. I would like us to be learning from the world church. I want us to learn about... Fuck, I forgot. I had it, and it totally went out of my head. What the fuck was it?
This podcast is an absolute shambles.
Yes, I got it. Okay. What? This is going to be edited out, so I sound smart. What I want us to learn from the world church, as much as you can generalize about these things, is to take the spiritual seriously. because a lot of my brothers and sisters who are part of the kind of progressive church, we don't like to think about the supernatural, we don't like to think about the spiritual, we're super uncomfortable with hell, we're super uncomfortable with heaven at this point. Everything seems to be reduced to a kind of enlightenment atheism with a little bit of Christianity sprinkled on top to say, and this is blessed because of Jesus. And I like a mindset that goes, no, there are forces. When Jesus talks about the rulers and principalities and dark powers of this dark world, that's a real thing. And I would love for us to take that and to go, yes, these things are operating. No, they're probably not the things that are causing your asthma, but they may be the things that are keeping power entrenched in a system like capitalism and enslaving the minds of people who are being oppressed by it. I would love us to be doing spiritual warfare against those actual rulers and principalities, the structures that keep people enslaved. I would love for us to be believing in prayer again, but for these sorts of things. I'm not saying that this is absent from the Western Church. I'm just saying that's the kind of stuff I would love, the stuff that would make us uncomfortable, you know. Some holding on to, you know, a literal interpretation of parts of the Bible at least, or a reverence for scripture. Sorry, Malky, you were saying that the people from the Global South are wrong. What was that?
I feel attacked. Carry on.
Yeah, I think those kinds of things, like some of the stuff where we think we're too clever, where the Western or the Northern Church is like, oh, poor darlings, they don't understand. And you often hear well-meaning Christians in the kind of white middle class of this country talking about, in ways that I'm sure they think is kind, like, well, yeah, but 100 years ago we were there. You know, you hear people talking about Islam like this all the time. Well, you've got to give them time, you know. And what you're saying is myth of progress stuff. We have progressed, we have evolved, they're not quite there yet. We'll just wait for them to catch up. Which I don't think is true. Other thoughts on what the Archbishop said?
I've enjoyed him, the way he was talking about, that was, oh, what a sentence that was. Sorry.
We are great at this.
But it's also, I've got a sensory overload being in a place with human beings.
Yeah, actually, before we carry on about Justin Welby, let's just talk a little bit about what it's like to be in an actual physical pub and how freaky it is and how uncomfortable I am right now.
It was like getting into the VIP section because there was a rope at the door that we were not allowed to pass.
It's not my experience of getting into the VIP section. It's usually just being waved by a long queue of people.
We stand in different social circles. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know, man. That's all I have to say on the subject.
But yeah, my prediction is I think we've hit a sweet spot, because I think we're going to get a firm slap on the wrist from the government and not be allowed to see people again. We've spoiled it.
I mean, us specifically.
Yeah, just us three will be singled out.
Yeah, how are you guys finding the whole, like, potentially going back into second lockdown? How's that affecting your thinking about life?
I'm strongly in the camp of, like, it seems like they're doing as much as they possibly can to not have to close pubs and restaurants and businesses and whatever, when they're definitely going to do that, and they're just kind of prolonging the inevitable for what seems like very little good reason, which is frustrating, because I would much rather be able to see my family than sit in a Wetherspoons, as much as I love sitting in the Wetherspoons with the two of you. I don't need to be around people all the time to be, like, you know, happy, so I'm alright.
You're fine with this?
Fine.
Are you also fine with this?
I think this is the first time the thought of another lockdown. I think I've got through the first one okay. Adapted, dealt with it. It was weird. And then it's slowly been lifted and I'm like, okay, let's get things back to normal. And just the thought of another full lockdown feels like a kick in the nuts.
Yeah.
But that's just a perspective in terms of what I'm able to do, as opposed to, like, my thoughts on how we should effectively tackle a pandemic. You know?
To be fair, you couldn't do worse than Boris Johnson, surely.
The bar is not high.
Just so, yeah. I mean, I thought I did alright with the lockdown, but I think it's because it was summer. And the idea of having another one when it's dark and cold and I can't run into people outside because it's going to be miserable and I won't want to be outside. and I don't know, that makes me sad. And I agree with you. I find the whole kind of like, we're going to have people going to work and school and university and then go, wow, people are being really irresponsible. I'm like, dude, you're putting them in contact with hundreds of people on the tube and then going, it must be teenagers. Now, to be fair, it is also teenagers.
Yeah.
But also, like, we were very much told to go out and, like, you know,
Giving money off stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then for them to turn around and be like, well, actually, this is your fault. I'm like, bitch.
Yeah.
Is it?
Other thoughts on what the Archbishop said?
So the whole other can of worms was the power element. It's not really, it's related, isn't it? But like, there's part of me that is drawn to like outsider anarchism, kind of monastery style Christianity, to really take the words of Jesus seriously, to really take the Sermon on the Mount seriously. It feels like he's describing that kind of radical lifestyle that's outside the kind of the mainstream. You know, you're kind of bowing out of you're not playing the game in any sense. But actually, like, to affect real change, powerful change, to really love your neighbour and not ignore all the terrible stuff in your society, then you need to get mixed up in some powerful institutions.
Yeah. Because I'm gonna be interviewing Stanley Hauerwas in a few weeks' time at Catalyst Light. You should go and check it out. Not affiliated with this podcast in any way, but and he's got a quite kind of strong thing about not getting involved in earthly power, and because that kind of stuff corrupts, or as Justin says, corrodes. I think that's great. I think it's a fairly privileged position to think that you can be okay without trying to affect the way laws are made or enacted. Like the parable of the Good Samaritan is not Jesus saying, and then the Good Samaritan set up his own community where they didn't rob motherfuckers on the road. You know, like, that's not a thing that he did. He actually got involved and helped out. And if the most efficient way to get involved and help people out is through government, why not do that rather than having a kind of MAGA Tea Party thing that goes, small government, that's the important thing. You know, I don't know.
We're quite far into the podcast to open up this line, but like, I guess there's the wider issue of ideological purity versus compromising in order to get stuff done, because it feels like you must very quickly get there. And another reason that I admire Justin is like he seems to have like peace within himself and integrity within himself, but genuinely like hold the balance and toe the line between, you know, evangelical but not fundamentalist, and, you know, liberal but not so willy that he'll alienate evangelicals. Yeah, and then, you know, I want to talk about Corbyn versus Starmer, but maybe it's not the time.
I feel like he came across a bit to me. I mean, we can't say that he is this way. This is just my perception. It seems like he was a little bit frustrated about the situation that he was in terms of like, it was like, you can't just ask somebody, like, you can't just get something done. You have to say, oh, this is a good idea, but I have to pass it by a dozen other people to be able to get that stuff done. And I know it seemed to me that maybe that was quite a frustrating position for him to be in, because I don't know, it feels like he doesn't really have any power. He's just meant to be a figurehead, and like, I feel like it, because
to me it sounded like he has so much power that he has to be super careful about saying, I want it to happen this way, because you could end up being quite autocratic and people would just make stuff happen because you said it. So you've got to kind of make sure that you haven't said something dumb and then, you know, everyone is suddenly enacting it. I'm lucky that the people who work for me don't respect me enough to just do what I tell them to do, and so you really have to run it by a lot of people.
It's like Trump, like what I hear from Trump, like kind of like buffered and mollycoddled around, being like, he doesn't mean that. Wait till he has his nap, and then we'll see.
Yeah, but I mean, even if that is the case, it must be quite frustrating.
I mean, that in itself is super,
like,
right? But maybe this is the problem with like the you know, looking for power. Is it one of those things that Jesus cautions us against because, like all sin, it's actually fundamentally unsatisfying? Like, to the core of who you are, in any kind of real, meaningful way?
Yeah, I think for many reasons, power is never what you expect it to be. I think power has an illusion around it of like you expect it to come with all of these benefits of being able to actually do something, but then like in so many situations your hands are like, you know, like you said about like Trump and stuff like that, like, you know, Trump didn't expect to be in the situation that he's in now when he like ran for president, but I mean that situation, like that was a marketing campaign that went wrong. Like so, and it will like always be unsatisfying, whether because you asked for it and then have to go through infinite amounts of bureaucracy to actually get anything done, or whether because now that you have power you actually have to do something with it, and that's quite frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do hear this about like Clinton and Obama coming out of it going, all the stuff that we wanted to do almost immediately we were told was impossible. I mean, they are centrist scumbags like Starmer, so it's quite possible that they had no intention of doing any good for the world at all, but I don't really have an opinion on that.
But that does seem like a legitimate thing. I'm more comfortable saying with Obama saying like, you know, he clearly wasn't Gandhi and being hamstrung all the way, but I think he was. I was almost going to say left leaning, but like, you know, like yeah, had left leaning sympathies. But yeah, the mechanisms, I don't know, the checks and balances were so much so, and you see little things from. I mean, I'm talking fictitious TV shows like The West Wing, but you just see some of the wranglings, the lobbying, the sort of the compromises. That's why it's difficult. I find it difficult sometimes, like looking at something like a voting record, like without digging into, okay, so what was that bill, and what were they okay, it looked like on the face of it that they were anti this really obvious thing. Let's give these hungry kids food, and they voted no. But actually, it would have meant X, Y, and Z, or they're giving away stuff elsewhere, like, which just is incredibly complicated.
I think that's, you know, fairly legitimate. Yes. I think what makes me more frustrated with people like Obama in retrospect is the amount that Trump has accomplished in terms of just saying, screw it, I'm going in this direction, and doing what he wants. He's just firing attorneys general. He is doing what he wants because he has decided that this is what he's going to do, and he's not going to be polite about it. Now, what he wants to do is wrong almost every single time, but I just wish there were some left-wingers who weren't so busy wringing their hands that they might try to do the same.
Well, weirdly, like, it made me think of a warfare example, which would probably be woefully inaccurate and inadequate. But like the difficulties of fighting like in the Middle East against like insurgents and people happy to use suicide bombs and stuff, and having to and hopefully wanting to uphold standards of human rights against that, like it's not a fair fight.
Yeah.
You know, so the Trump equivalent, like, you know, a good guy in power would be like, no, there's procedures that we need to go through. We need to get people on side. We need to check all this off, as opposed to steamrolling it because fuck it.
But is that goodness and ethics, or is that squeamishness and pussyfooting? By the way, that's my favorite quote from the Battle of Algiers. Have you seen the Battle of Algiers? About the Algerian civil war against the French, or war of liberation against the French, and they capture a terrorist who has been sending women into restaurants with bombs in their baskets, and he's put in front of these French journalists who go like, isn't it cowardly to send women into restaurants with bombs in baskets and kill innocent civilians? And the terrorist says, right now French planes are bombing French Indochina and also killing innocent civilians. Give us your planes and you can have our baskets. And I kind of like that as well, of the you know. Also, side note, the ISIS example and Al-Qaeda in the Levant, have you read Stanley McChrystal's management book, Team of Teams? It's fascinating about how the Americans it's a management book, but it's based on the Americans in Iraq trying to work out how to fight people who are not well trained, who are not efficient in their warfare, and you've got the best trained, most efficient army in the world having rings run around it by people who are just willing to do things differently, which I just think is really interesting as well. And I guess that's what frustrates me, is that thing from Yeats where he talks about, you know, the people who are wrong believing fervently and the people who are right being completely unsure of themselves. I'd like the people who are right to be a little bit more sure of themselves, and I'd like us to not have this automatic assumption that being sure of yourself means you're wrong.
I feel like what you were kind of saying before of like, is there some like Trump will just do whatever he wants because he knows he'll just do it, or rather than kind of like just, I don't know, pussyfooting around it. I think that the left is too far gone in terms of like being able to shout somebody down and like claim that they're doing things wrong. I don't think you could get away with it with that attitude. I just don't think you could do it. I don't think you would be allowed. I don't know. Well, not in it like allowed. I just don't think that people would listen to you. Like
definitely not progressive, kind of liberal circles for sure.
Yeah, like I don't think it's not a healthy way of doing it. I don't think. But I could not see a scenario where somebody would act like Trump on the other side of the spectrum and be able to get away with it. I just don't think people would let them.
Yeah, especially,
rest in power, Fidel Castro.
Especially at the moment that it seems like the right has got a powerful argument in terms of like, you know, cancel culture and this caricature of a woke person screaming everyone's a racist. You know, so as soon as you get on a soapbox saying this is racist, then it's like, oh well, and look, another one. You know.
Yeah. Final thoughts on Justin and power and the World Church and, you know, all that stuff.
As a non-Anglican, oh wait a minute, I think I got to an Anglican church. I'm an Anglican. Hey guys.
He must be so proud.
I'd like to take this opportunity to come out to my dad as an Anglican.
That's actually a big deal, to be fair.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily fussed about who the Archbishop of Canterbury is, but like I'm glad it's Justin. Yeah. It seems legit.
Yeah, it seems very nice.
Yeah, I would agree. If we're like, as also somebody who's not too fussed about the Anglican Church, who doesn't necessarily feel the need to listen to the Anglican Church, it's nice to be like, maybe there is a decent guy in there. So
absolutely. Thank you so much to Justin Welby for allowing me to interview you and for allowing us to put it on this podcast. Yeah. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to Beer Christianity. You can find us on Twitter at BeerXianity. You can find all of our episodes at beerchristianity.libsyn.com. That's libsyn.com. You can find us on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on, what is that one in India? I can't even remember its name. Damn it. Hi guys in India. Sorry, I forgot the platform. This is great for this episode.
Hashtag Global South.
I just don't want to get it wrong. Yeah, there's a new platform that we go to as well. So do write in and tell us at beerchristianity@yahoo.com what platform you're listening to us. Also send us any questions that you would like us to answer, comments, all that sort of stuff. And thanks so much for listening. Bye!